So many Scottish students are struggling, and it's hard to understand why. This can be micro-discriminations that often go dismissed. This can be mocking someone's accent or excluding a worker or commuter student. These often aren't acknowledged because they're seen as nitpicking, but when you examine the root causes, it's valid for them to complain. The University of Edinburgh and the City of Edinburgh dominate in employment and infrastructure, and of course with any other transaction, when one gains land and resources, another loses land and resources. Before going to speak with the university seniors, I'm going to speak to Jim Slavin, who is a local activist for the working class population of Edinburgh, and we're going to examine why the students experience these issues that they do. So, if you don't mind just kind of explaining why Dummy Dykes is the kind of last housing kind of scheme in Edinburgh in terms of social cleansing. And...
Yeah. Well, Dummy Dykes is unique in Edinburgh because it's the only inner city housing scheme. All the other housing schemes are on the margins of the city, both geographically but in every other way as well, whereas Dummy Dykes is right in the heart of the Old Town. So that makes it unique. And obviously, as there's been this sort of social cleansing in the Old Town, the effect of that has been that Dummy Dykes is the last sort of concentration of settled residents in the Old Town.
Yeah. So in terms of social infrastructure, what has happened to the public spaces? What is there? What isn't there? Is this kind of government hostility towards the working class?
What we've seen is in housing schemes generally, but if we think of Dummy Dykes in particular in the Old Town, we have seen a disinvestment in social infrastructure. So it has been badly maintained, it has been run down, and in Dummy Dykes it is now disappeared. And what do we mean by social infrastructure? I mean the community centre we once had, the training centre, community flats, green space that people could meet and gather, speak to their neighbours, speak about problems, just get to know each other a bit. All of those spaces are now gone. They're either closed or they've been colonised by what we describe middle class missionaries from state funded projects, which has the effect of meaning that space that was public is now private space that can only be accessed through these external organisations. I mean, it's been shown with various studies across the world that where social infrastructure is maintained and run properly and exists in a way that works for local people, then it has a huge impact on people's health, but also just the well-being of the community, just the area that people are able to mix more, to engage with each other, to understand each other better. And in somewhere like the centre of Edinburgh, where there is a lot of people coming from different parts of the world, where the area has changed so much, that social infrastructure becomes really vital for people understanding what people's views are, what their different cultures are, what their perspectives are, why they're here. And when we have an absence of that, like we do in Dummy Dykes, it is incredibly detrimental to community cohesion, but also to people's health and well-being.
So St Anne's Community Centre, that was given to Edinburgh University.
Yeah.
Have they done anything with it? Is there any other examples that that's happened to? Or even student accommodation that's kind of pricing out residents? And
yeah, I mean, and this is what's important because we're at a sort of crisis moment in Dummy Dykes with the collapse of the social infrastructure, but we have to see this as we do with gentrification generally. It's not an event, it's a process. It's something that happens over time in different waves. And so one of the problems in Dummy Dykes has been that the youth club that was based in Southbridge Community Centre has had to be moved to Dummy Dykes Community Centre because Southbridge Centre was given away to the Fringe Society for £1 for 100 years. So that meant all the projects that were based in there, all the services that were providing there were gone. And they couldn't move the youth club from Southbridge to just down the road to St Anne's Community Centre because they'd already given St Anne's Community Centre away to the university and to the NHS. And that now provides services for I think for various people in terms of the homeless hostels or whatever, but it's no longer a community centre, it is no longer accessible to local residents in the way it was. So that's St Anne's gone, Southbridge gone, and a knock-on effect is now that the community centre in Dummy Dykes is gone as well. So these are all sort of knock-on effects which have a really detrimental impact on the sort of social fabric of the area, and which are a result of policy. They're a result of policy. These things are all licensed by the council, they're all profitable for the university and for private companies, but have a terrible effect on working class people living in this area.
Historically, Edinburgh is an elite institution which has prevented local Scottish students from being able to attend. But with the Widening Participation programme, we have seen a rise in the number of Scottish students. This widening participation programme feels like a bit of a rush to meet quotas. Although there's high targets of lower socioeconomic students, there is not continued support throughout their university experience, which affects their ability to be able to integrate onto campus and flourish during their university experience.
Widening participation to me is a very positive thing if it can get people through the doors they didn't think were open to them. But I think widening participation has to be way, way more than that. And again, it goes back to a lot of the things we've touched on around culture and belonging and sense of entitlement and self-confidence, self-belief. I think if you can't support that with people who really understand where you're coming from and who can help you anticipate or deal with things that are difficult for your own circumstances, then I think there's no point. You're setting people up for failure, setting people up to feel rubbish about themselves, to say, no, I've had this opportunity and I can't do anything with it. And that's because you maybe are not giving enough of the other support around culture change, around changes in the way you see yourself, your relationships with other people. I think if you can't do that, then yeah, get the people in the door, brilliant, tick your box, but you're not doing the job unless you can do that. I feel really strongly about that. Yeah.
Students at Edinburgh University have always struggled with these issues, but why are they only getting spoken about now? 70% of Scottish students are flagged. This means they face stigmatisation and financial constraints which impacts their ability to have a presence on campus. This feeling of a lack of Scottish presence on campus is very evident. Even the largest undergraduate student news body had joked about the lack of Scottish presence on campus. The Widening Participation programme allows very talented and capable individuals of having their well-deserved place at this institution. But for them to fully integrate and contribute to this institution, we need to address these systemic issues, and this starts with a conversation. True widening participation cannot happen without this. I'm going to go speak to the Vice Principal, Colm Harmon, to discuss these issues.
Okay, so I'm Colm Harmon. I'm Vice Principal for Students here at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm also a Professor of Economics at the University of Edinburgh.
You do the widening participation scheme. What do you think of the widening participation scheme?
Well, I convene the committee, so it's a deep commitment from the university, and I think there's a lot there's a huge amount of what you've just described. I think there's one which is a deep misunderstanding of how the system works for Scotland and for Scottish students. I think it's not widely seen that we have a very firm cap on the number of students. So we have the absolute max number of Scottish students that we can have. If we have more, then we're penalised for doing so. It is not that widely known that Edinburgh is perhaps the biggest provider, for example, of kind of access kind of scholarships in the UK, if not the biggest. I think certainly into sort of double digits in terms of millions that we spend on that each year. I find it really distasteful to see some of the narrative about that being wrong, that we shouldn't give that sense of priority to students who have diverse backgrounds to get in. I think that's absolutely the right strategic role for the university to do. But the next step of that is that they need to succeed. And we need to make sure that we don't see sort of attainment gaps widening. And I think Edinburgh has to sort of start to look more deeply at the experience of students, all students, but particularly WP students, as they move through. It's an epic failure on our part if, having got them in, we don't get them out the other end.
Yeah, many commuting students have experienced kind of been unable to integrate into the university. What support is there for commuter students?
That's difficult. I think that I think it's a fair comment that we haven't, as I said, in various ways, we do tend to think of students a bit more homogeneously than we should. I think on the commuting students piece, again, I think I completely see how Edinburgh, probably more than many institutions, is built around being in the city. And that is a worry that I've had for some time. And it may be that we just need to make sure that I'm hoping again through things like cohort activities and so on, we can start to sort of recognise that more explicitly. But the community students is a worry, and I think if it is predominantly the students that you're representing that are in that category. So please help us to sort of tell us what you think we need to be doing and we'll try to do it.
Commuter students are predominantly, but not exclusively, working class, flagged students from Scotland. These students are also those who are impacted the most by the degradation of social infrastructure. This makes for a dual battle against both elitism within the structural infrastructure of Edinburgh, as well as against backhanded widening participation initiatives that leave students feeling redundant.
I'm from just outside Edinburgh and I came to this uni because I thought it's my local university. I have been passing through this campus all my life. It's something familiar. It's in the city I love. And when I arrived at the uni in first year, I think it was like stepping into a different world. I stopped kind of recognising the Edinburgh that I loved, and I fell out of love with the city because it completely changed my perspective on what the city was, because the reality was I was now in this big institution with lots of traditions and structures and ways of being that I think are fundamentally classist in many ways, and we know that the uni systemically discriminates against Scottish students. And I think, you know, when everyone comes to a university like Edinburgh, often the divisions we are seeing here are just a more compressed reflection of wider British society, and to get rid of classism in the uni, we have to get rid of it in society, which is easier said than done. I think I knew like 2 people who went to private school before I came here, and to learn that sort of the stereotypes I'd seen on TikTok were actually really apparent and true was, I think, a massive surprise to me. So for me, it was a very strange feeling arriving at university and it just being the complete opposite of what I expected. And I say that as someone who, yes, is state educated, but comfortably comes from a middle class background, and I don't even have that broad of a Scottish accent.
Accent bias can be pinpointed as an experience contributing to the feelings of redundancy and general unwelcomeness onto the campus. To give these students their voices back, the first step being taken is in tackling accent bias.
It's like, why am I funny? Why am I a circus act?
What is accent bias?
Yeah, so I think first of all, it's important to define the 2 concepts separately. So accent is what we're talking about there is speech sounds, so phonological stuff. And so that is simply related to someone's social background. So whether that be your age, whether that be the region you're from, sexuality, so on. And everybody has an accent, right? So the idea of accented English is a misnomer because all languages have an accent, right? Every time we speak. And so that on the one hand functions as a way of us making these social judgments about people. And we often use accent to make social inferences about someone, like for instance, where they're from or their social class background. These on their own are not particularly problematic. But we sometimes use accent to judge unrelated characteristics. So that be something like someone's intelligence or competence to do a job. And accent has nothing to do with somebody's intelligence or their competence to be able to do a job. So the bias, what we're talking about there, is basically a simplified way of thinking about the world. It's a natural human tendency to do this, and alone it's not problematic, right? We know that people have biases, but they have the potential to become problematic when they're applied to, for instance, discriminate against a candidate for a job on the basis of who might have a more suitable accent or perceived suitable accent for that job. If you look at a university, I think there's multiple ways in which accent bias manifests. So even before university students come here, we can think about selection procedures and the kind of demographics that universities recruit. So if we think of university and higher education as what has often been described as an elite, situation, a profession, which has thankfully changed in recent years with, for instance, widening participation strategies, we can think about that already operating in some way. But I think the main kind of experience that students have is when students come together with others who they may have not interacted with before, and you hear accents that you have never heard before, or you hear people speak in ways that are different to your peer group that you're used to hanging around with. So we could think about, for instance, like in a situation like this university, where you might have students who attended schools in England, in southern England, and now they're hearing students who speak varieties of Scottish English that they haven't heard before. And I think it's unavoidable to think about how language might function in this way. Well, I mean, also from a personal perspective, right? You know, going to a school as I did, that was pretty tough. It was under-resourced, right? And you can think about the ways that you were perceived by your classmates, whether that be like them knowing that I was gay long before I knew I was gay, right? It was largely to do with how I spoke, right? And similarly, coming from like a family that are largely working class, right? You could think about how interactions with your families are often related to this linguistic difference I speak about.
Accent bias is just one of the many struggles that we face. There's also culture shock, inability to access social infrastructure with the university, and inability to access accommodation. But it's important to note that these struggles are not just concentrated to Scottish students. For example, Scottish students that are out with of the Widening Participation scheme make up 5% of the university population, and many of these Scots will come from privileged backgrounds and have attended elite private schools. These barriers are not only faced by Scottish students, but the rest of the Widening Participation students across the UK, and of course international students who make up 50% of the student body. International students can still be the first of their family to attend university and often exploited by accommodation prices due to the pressure to secure accommodation in a foreign country. What defines the flag students that make up 20% of the student body is that they are Scottish, and this often comes with negative stereotypes.
Most of my friends are not from this uni. They live in other cities in Scotland, or they go to other unis within Edinburgh. And for me, that provided quite a good perspective on there is a life outside uni. And as I've taken a year out and gone away to work, those are the things that I have fallen back on. But not every student has that luxury. Some students are sort of trapped here in the uni bubble, in the Edinburgh bubble, and really struggling within that. So I was very fortunate to have those tools and the time and the financial ability to take a step back and to sort of pull those levers in ways that would help me, because I knew those levers existed and I knew how to access those opportunities, and that's absolutely not the same for every student. I do fully, strongly believe that there are aspects of this uni that do have my best interests at heart. I think there are excellent teaching staff here, there's excellent students, there are excellent student representatives, but I think where you need to look is not at that immediate support, but at the very top of the institution, and that is where I believe they probably don't have our best interests at heart. I think at the end of the day, this university is for profit, not for students. And when you look at how, you know, my second year and some of my first year was very much affected by strikes, and the fact that this uni is sitting on something like £40 billion of reserves, and the principal is given a house and an excellent salary, the fact that they seemingly can't afford to pay their staff and are now seemingly being impacted by the increase in employers' national insurance is something I find very hard to stomach and hard to marry up in my head with the fact that this institution owns like 20% of the land in Edinburgh. It could solve the housing crisis, it could bring in more Scottish students, it could decrease tuition for other students. It is a for-profit organisation at the end of the day.
The simplicity of the flagging policy, especially with its blanket application of certain postcodes classified by SIMD as deprived, creates misinformation and stigmatisation of Scottish students. Even the Vice Principal himself has recognised this.
There's a really, you know, you can sort of see how the funding differences create these kind of tensions among the student body. You lot are paying and we're not, and that kind of stuff. And that's just, you know, it's perhaps inevitable, it's wrong. And in particular, it's not a Scottish student's fault what the higher education funding system does. They have the virtue of being from Scotland, have applied to a Scottish university, have got in, and that's the regime they face. If they face abuse for that, we need to hear about it. It's not on.
So the question is, what policy could amend this? And this is where we should take a page out of the university's career service book to begin to address this massive question.
I think for some students, they may not have a choice but to work to pay for the things that life needs you to pay for while you're studying. But those skills that students are building in time management and their resilience and independence are really valuable. I think that students may struggle with, while they're working, while studying, to attend all of their classes. They won't have as much time to study, and also may just be tired from working and trying to balance everything, so may not be able to contribute or engage in the same way in lectures or labs than if they didn't have a job. And I think those skills that students then may have to build or do build through part-time work in the time management and balancing those things, building their resilience and independence, and their awareness of that is very valuable.
In terms of transferable skills, I think the thing that's useful for students to be aware of is that in the UK labour market, about 70% of the jobs are kind of degree agnostic. So the idea that the employer isn't necessarily looking for a specific degree discipline in order to do that job. So actually the skills that they're gaining from any kind of volunteering work or work experience, part-time work, really play into the transferable skills that an employer then looks for in the graduate market. So I think thinking about, like you said, kind of time management, communication skills, all of these things are things that people can really be developing as they're going through their university degree. And then when it comes to recruitment, a lot of the graduate recruiters are thinking about those kind of competencies, and that's how someone will apply for those graduate jobs. So being able to then reflect on their experiences and evidence that in their applications will really benefit them and make them feel more confident in applying for those graduate jobs. We have a huge range of different ways that students can engage. So the careers fairs are, I guess, primarily a way to engage with employers that are coming onto campus who want to hire University of Edinburgh students, and a lot of them have what they think of as kind of diversity strategies for how they broaden their workforce and reach either more women or a greater diversity in general. And quite a few of them do actually look at social mobility as a key diversity target from their perspective. So whilst I know that it's not necessarily comfortable to think of like pigeonholing yourself in that way, it's also nice to know that employers are thinking about that and wanting to put support in place once people are in the workplace, that will enable a feeling of equality in that space, and that's definitely coming through in the careers fairs that we put on. And then there's also obviously more targeted activity through kind of group work and one-to-one sessions that that students can engage with, as well as obviously all of the online resources that are there the whole year through.
I really hate the phrase in politics U-turn, because a lot of the time when a party does a U-turn, I do fully believe that that is because they have realised, okay, this isn't working, let's change our mind. I think students need to actively fight against the sort of polarisation. I believe that this university is systemically discriminatory against Scottish students, and I believe that there are a lot of really embedded and ingrained issues with this institution, but I don't believe that everyone running it is fundamentally a bad person. And I think working in politics in the third sector, it gives you an appreciation of just how difficult it is to reform, let alone revolutionise any organisation, because there are so many cogs in the wheel, there are so many different stakeholders, there's so many indirect impacts that your decisions within an institution have, and therefore it can be really intimidating to make any big changes, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And that doesn't mean that Edinburgh can't set an example and be a world leader in becoming a fairer place that is more disconnected from its colonial past and from its classist tendencies.
The main kind of approach that we've taken so far is by developing an in-person workshop where we basically run through the basics of accent bias and how this might manifest in different ways, and get people to think about not only their own experiences, but whether they've seen this at the university. And what we've been doing is rolling this out in department meetings because it's a captive audience. Often with EDI initiatives, you get self-selection, so people who are already on board with these issues might attend a workshop, but people who might not understand them or realise their importance might not enrol. So going to department meetings is actually really quite a positive way of addressing this, because it engages with people who might not have otherwise attended this meeting. And I mean, the reason why we're doing this is because the accent bias research and the Sutton Trust report found that actually one of the most effective interventions here is raising awareness that this is an issue.
I think for people who have been involved in the type of collective action that we're talking about, it has a huge impact on individuals. There's been a lot of young people who got involved with our programmes where we did boxing in housing schemes, we did community football in housing schemes, we distributed 1,000 brand new bikes to kids in housing schemes. So a lot of people that came and were involved in these type of projects, they benefited from it, and we could see the difference in them in terms of these were a lot of kids that were excluded for community centres or maybe didn't do well in school, but they came to our projects and they felt valued, they felt part of it, they weren't going to be excluded in the same way as the state was excluding them, they were going to be welcomed in and supported. It was about positive reinforcement, and so we could see the difference in the kids as well in terms of how they felt part of their community, but also a lot of them then have went on to college and university as well, so we have seen actual legacy impact a very, very positive way.
I'm a firm believer that if we want an equal society and a diverse society, we need a good education system. Education is what sets us up to be successful in life. For me, a massive chunk of that has been advocating for exam reform in Scotland. We have a centuries-old exam system. It has not changed much at all since the Victorian era. And I think to measure every student on one exam at the end of the year as evidence of how capable they are is just, it's Victorian.
It would obviously, it's good. I mean, I'm a graduate of Edinburgh University myself. We all like the fact that there's so many students come to the city. I think residents welcome that, like we welcome tourism as well. But I think it is important that in recent years there has become a sort of division there as well, where students would have been much more part of the community in terms of mixing in pubs with local people. That's all sort of broken down in this area, particularly in Old Town, because there's less local bars for a start, there's less local residents for a start. So I think we should maybe make an effort to try and engage with local people to understand the difficulties that there are, because sometimes it can seem like local residents are against students or against tourists, and that is absolutely not the case. Like, what we need to do is make sure we're creating some sort of social mix. That would have been much easier to do if the council were prepared to do that. The council are, as I say, hostile to any sort of partnership work with working class residents, so we probably have to do that in a bottom-up way ourselves. Like, we have to find mechanisms whereby undergraduate students that are in Edinburgh can come together with local people to understand some of the issues that affect both.
We need to take more active steps towards bridging that gap and shortening that divide. And I think one of the first steps actually in that is Scottish students recognising that their experiences are valid and that they do absolutely have a place at this university.
As a final message, I would urge us all to build a community. No matter your position or your background, whether you're a staff or student or working class, upper class. By doing this, we should all work together to find an innovative solution to the experiences that Scottish students have faced. If you'd like to join in on the conversation, you should explore Scottish Social Mobility Society's website and socials.